presented Cisema, we're a regulatory affairs consultancy. I'm Hamish. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm registered as a lawyer in New South Wales, Australia, as well as Hong Kong. And I have been living in Hong Kong for 7 years. I'd also like to present my colleagues Dora and Alison, who are joining me for the webinar today. Dora, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Thank you, Hamish. I'm Dora Yang. I studied international management with my master's degree in the UK, and I lived there for many years. And then I devoted myself into the medical industry. Now I'm the head of post-market surveillance of Cisema Beijing, and very nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dora. Alison.
Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Hamish. And hello, everybody. This is Alison here. I'm a Brazilian living here in China. I live in China for the past 7 years. So I came to China firstly to study for my master's degree, and I graduated here as in international relations. And then I engaged in the medical device field 5 years ago. And now my role in Cisema Beijing is Chief Project Management, and with a vast experience on this the field. And it's my pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you. Thank you both. So today we're speaking about post-market in China as part of the Medical Device and IVD Cisema Webinar Series. In broad outline, our agenda is to speak about NMPA certificate and change management, followed by the local agent or NMPA legal agent role. We're then going to speak in more detail about some of the PMS compliance requirements, localization perspectives, implementation of the MAH as part of that, as well as the quality management system and standards updates, as well as a little bit about overseas factory inspections. So first of all, maintaining PMS compliance is the broad topic, and we have set out here on the slide a large picture about the key issues, including NMPA legal agent responsibilities, your QMS system, and the key points that needs to keep updating and be in compliance with overseas factory inspections and so on around the circle. We're not going to go into all of the points here today. We're going to pick out a few key ones in the short time available. But if you have more interest about specific topics, don't hesitate to get in touch. It's also worthwhile saying, and maybe I can hand over to Dora here about the increasing policy emphasis on post-market matters as part of NMPA's scrutiny. Can you tell us through a little bit more about the increasing change and emphasis of the regulator?
Yes, of course, because it's important for us to know the policy change and the trend from NMPA when we should follow closely. And it's from our studies in this industry for many years. And recently we found out that NMPA is shifting their focus from the pre-market registration now to the post-market surveillance. And we listed here some real cases and examples for you. As you can see, the new measures, the new policy published regarding the focused monitoring and some policies to do the reassess. And also from 2019, the new adverse event e-platform has been used to connect more closely between each parties regarding the reactions of the adverse event. And also China started to do the centralized, we also called the national e-procurement regarding some medical device, and also the UDIs and unannounced inspections also be used recently, like more frequently than before. So from these dimensions, we can see they are all reflect the emphasis of the PMS side.
Thanks, Dora. Yeah, and Dora has been very busy recently with her team as they finished the deadline just yesterday for a number of, for example, bidding platform points, which feeds very much into the broader e-procurement, e-platform,
Yes,
national procurement.
exactly. Yeah, that would be the increase the big volume of the purchase.
Thank you. So that's the broader picture. Now we just move into some of the detail, particularly around NMPA certificate management. How do you appropriately manage your certificate throughout the product lifecycle? We're talking here after, of course, you've obtained the NMPA registration. Alison, maybe you could talk us through this slide and just what we're looking at here as to what are the triggers that may lead to an NMPA certificate change.
Of course, Hamish. Thank you very much. Yeah. So firstly, would you like to talk about the triggers from the manufacturer side and the regulatory side? What the manufacturers have to do to change to proceed with the certificate changes. So the manufacturer side, in case the manufacturer proceed changing with its name or the address of the registrant in the certificate, also the legal agent, and in case of product name, model, and specifications approved in the certificate, the manufacturer also has to proceed with changes. And also for production address side, okay, even domestic or overseas manufacturer, it applied for both. And then for a regulatory perspective, so in case of regulations or technical guidelines or classification catalogs or standards change from the authority side, it also triggers in some cases for certificate changes. So the manufacturer has to comply with the latest regulations.
Yeah, and we're going to get onto particular practice points here
Yes.
relating to a mandatory standard change in particular that attendees may be interested in.
Yes.
So what are the change types, Alison?
So yes, we classify here as two change types. One, we call it as an administrative change. Another one are approval changes. So the administrative changes refers for the naming or address or legal agent change from the manufacturer side, as well as a production address. So, but the production address, there are two types. So if they're national manufacturers, they can simply go for administrative changes. But if it's for overseas imported products, they have to go through our approval change that we are going to talk about now. So the approval changes are triggers if the manufacturer changed the product name, model, specifications, and the registration certificate, and also in the structure, composition of the product, scope of application, product technical requirements, and other changes corresponding in the other content column. So the other content column is a part of the certification here in China. So if there are contents there and the manufacturer needs to change it, they also have to proceed with the approval changes. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So, and then we have classified here as 5 kinds of changes. For example, one, we call it as approval change with testing. In case the product needs to be tested to comply with the Chinese requirements. So the second one is approval change without testing. Third, administrative change. Fourth, as an IFU change. And fifth, other changes under internal control, so not affected by IFU. So about these 5 points, we are going to talk in the next slide, and I'll give you some examples as well. So here, we prepared for you a decision tree that you can evaluate and analyze where and how and in each situation and what you have to consider in order to proceed. So as the starting point, when the manufacturer, talking about the manufacturer side, has a change, and then we are going to evaluate it first. First question I have to do is to check whether an NMPA application is applicable for this case or not. If no, we can simply go for internal change. So as internal change, you can consider as an example, so if the manufacturer decides to change suppliers for non-key components, then you don't need to inform an NMPA about it. So you can just change internally. But this evaluation has to be very carefully made. So non-key components are components that does not appear in the IFU, neither in technical requirements. You can consider in this way. Okay, in case an NMPA application is necessary, the second part you have to evaluate is approval change necessary? If no, you decide that no, we suggest you to check whether these changes are related to the IFU. So if there's no changes in the IFU, you can proceed directly with the administrative change. So the administrative change example could be a legal agent change in China. Okay, and then in case changes are necessary in the IFU, you proceed directly with the user manual change. Okay. And then coming back for the approval change, if yes, it's necessary, other question you have to do is test required? If yes, test is, if no, test is not required, you can directly go for the approval change with fault testing. If it's required, you have to go directly for the approval change with testing. So as an example of approval change with fault testing is production site. If the manufacturer decides to change the production site. And then as an example of approval change with testing is product technical requirement changes and device performance changes, new features or new functions.
Thank you, Alison. And there's an interesting question from Sarah. Thank you for your question. On this point, asking, is it known why an address change for a domestic company is seen as less significant than for a foreign manufacturer? I have some thoughts on it, but Alison or Dory, do you have any specific thoughts as to why that may be? I guess actually,
it's not less. Sorry, it's not less significant. It's just an internal way that an NMPA control it. So an NMPA has a better control of domestic companies, so that's why they facilitate these changes for domestic companies. But for foreign manufacturers, they want to have a better analysis in order to approve it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. And
yeah, because NMPA can conduct the on-site inspections for the site change, but for overseas manufacturers, that will be difficult. So you'll focus more on the documents they provided from the overseas manufacturer.
Thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, Sarah, and if there's any further clarifications, please let us know. So let's move on to another interesting change aspect, which relates to mandatory standard change update. This might fit into the second bucket, which Alison presented before, as to it's not an approval that comes within or from the manufacturer or is triggered by the manufacturer, but is more something that's triggered, by something outside of their control, of course. And we've just set out here a little bit of broad background detail about standards and management authority in China. Generally, a transition time will be, for example, 3 years for the active device standard that's being updated, and that we can talk a little bit more about shortly. So you can see here on the slide, we've set out what the timeline used to look like for a renewal and a product change. And let's say that this mandatory standard change has occurred or is about to be implemented, and you need to test according to the new updated standards. Therefore, you may or may not have a product change triggered. You also want to renew your application. You used to, of course, be able to combine the renewal and the product change in one application, and then get the renewal. Now, or since last year, at least October last year, NMPA requires you to first make the product change application, get your change certificate, and only then can you apply for your renewal. So companies really have to be cautious about timelines here, given that in the case where testing is required to be done again, this can take upwards of a year or longer to get the change certificate. And of course, renewals must be, renewal application should be submitted at least 6 months in advance of expiry. So companies really need to be cautious about the timing. We're going to go into what that means in practice when we talk about the new China standard GB update for electrotechnical medical devices. So as of 1st of May next year, companies will need to ensure that for their active devices that they are tested and comply in accordance with a new standard. It's GB 9706 of 2020 relating to basic safety and performance. So therefore, it affects all active devices, electric medical equipment on the market. The previous version of the standard was issued in 2007, and this new version introduces some 70 or more changes. It's largely the same as the IEC 60601-1 2012, although there are some modifications. So you need to make sure you test according to the Chinese standard. Let's take a look at the timeline. So GB 706, 2007 came into force in July of 2007. The updated standard was first published in 2020, in April of 2020, with an enforcement date of 1st of May next year. So companies kind of had a 3-year timeline and window to plan for and look to this update. The 3-year lead time, as I said. In case, I should also mention that the penalties for non-compliance do include basic fines to more consequential fines of up to 3 times income, or even possible 10-year bans on production and sales in case of real seriousness. It's not clear at this stage to what extent NMPA will implement these potential penalties or fines. So what does this mean for products already on the market? This, of course, means that given the timeline of May next year is only or even less than 6 months away, you should already have sent off your products for type testing already against the new standard and any other standard changes that may indeed affect your product. But it may be that this hasn't been possible yet, and indeed we understand from the test labs that there is a big backlog. A number of labs haven't even been able to be certified to do this testing until relatively recently. There's also a huge number of products already on the market that need to update according to this standard. We hear from Advamed, for example, that they have been making a concerted push to try to delay some of the implementation of the 1st May deadline. And there's been even some rumors that NMPA will enact some enforcement discretion as to the 1st of May implementation of full testing according to the standards. But our general advice, and maybe I can hand over to Alison or Dora if you'd like to step in here, is that ideally companies should test according to the new standard by the deadline. But if that's not possible, then at the very least they should try to start the testing before 1st of May deadline to show some evidence in case of inspection or query that the company is trying to comply. Alison, or Dora, would you like to?
Hamish, thank you for your overview. You're correct on your explanation. Yes, thank you very much. Just complementing. So yes, so now we have a very short time to comply with that. For example, manufacturers who did not comply with the regulations yet. So some of them, they are performing tests. Some of them they did not even start yet. So what we are suggesting to the manufacturers right now is to get at least the test report before May 2023. So in this way, in case of further NMPA inspections on the market and collection and inspections of the products and the sampling, and then they can comply and prove to an NMPA that they are tested and approved by a Chinese laboratory, that their product comply with the new requirements. And then they proceed with the changes, and then after the certificate renewal. But our suggestion right now is at least to get the test report by May 2023.
Yeah, thank you, Alison, and that's stronger than what I just said. So, Alison is much more the regulatory expert than I am on these points. But even having said that, we would still strongly encourage companies not to just sit there and do nothing because they figure, hey, we're not going to be able to do testing by the deadline. We would strongly encourage them to at least have tried to start testing at this time, so that they have an initiation of a test notice with NMPA. Anyway, enough about this topic. I'd be happy to speak to you more attendees if you'd like to understand more about it. Let's move on to the NMPA legal agent, the local agent role. If you are already registered, you probably have a legal agent, or you must have a legal agent already. But let's just do a brief recap about the options. Dora, would you like to take us through the
Okay, no problem. Yeah, let me do a brief introductions of the legal agent part. As Hamish said, as a overseas manufacturer, you need to appoint a legal entity in China as your legal agent, like to assist you during the registration progress and also the post-market stage in front of NMPA and also other related authorities to deal with the regulatory affairs. And in front of you, actually, you have three choices. We put them here. One is your distributor, and one you can establish your own subsidiary in China. And also the third-party consulting firm like Cisema will also be your choice. And we do some briefly analyze for you to have a look of each of them. So for distributors, I will say that would be the most common choice chosen by the overseas manufacturer in the past. As you can see, it's obviously less cost, and you can have a better communication because you need only to communicate with them. But it's obvious you can see many disadvantages of this choice because you cannot protect your IP properly, and also you will be relying much on the distributor. And also the distributors, they don't have much knowledge or enough support on the ongoing surveillance or the registration part. So I would say if you would like to change your distributors or change the legal agent, that would be really difficult for you to divorce with them. So that's our analyze. And also, as I said, you can establish the subsidiary in China. That will be at the extreme side for you to protect your IP, and also you can control comprehensively. But on the other side, you need to have the time. It will be the most time and investment consuming choice for you. Okay, so next will be the third party consulting company like Cisema. As the third party company, we don't involve in any commercial activities. So we basically don't have any conflicts of interests with the manufacturers. So we're very in a mutual place. And we can be independent from the distributors at the same time. If you want to change your distribution channels, distributors, that's free to go. And also, we have our own professional PMS team to provide you the system. To provide you comprehensive management on the post-market surveillance side. But of course, you need to pay a bit service fee or annual fee to our to the service we provided. Okay.
Thanks, Dora. Yeah, and then in
Yeah.
terms of legal agent responsibilities, I mean, we've just set out here on the slide a very brief overview about, key points that are needed. Are there any in particular that are worth
I
drawing
will
out?
say they're all really important for the manufacturer to conduct, actually. As I emphasized in the beginning, NMPA is really like focusing on the post-market surveillance during the recent years. And I believe it will be continuously more stricter than before. So I would say, but from my understanding, the adverse event management and also the bidding support and also the QMS will be more important and more complete and more complicated to do. So we will have more introductions in the following for you to understand the details.
Thank you. And then just about changing legal agent, maybe if you could just recap quickly on how companies can change the legal agent if they would like to.
Yes, and I would say if you would like to change your legal agent, from our perspective, that would be easy to do, because you don't need to involve your old previous legal agent in, and we only need below 3 documents and their copies, not the original one from your side, actually. So one is the NMPA certificate, and one is the product technical requirement. And the last one will be the change approvals issued or you applied to NMPA before. So with 3 documents you provided to us, that will be enough for you, and leave that to us to change the legal agent for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to talk a little bit about one of the topics in particular that that Dora mentioned there, and that's adverse events. So there is a national adverse event monitoring system, and we've just set out a quick screenshot capture here on the slide as to what the Chinese system looks like. The broad responsibilities for your NMPA legal agent for handling adverse events are also described here on the slide with some bullet points about monitoring the system and account. That's the online account with NMPA. Relevant report writing like the periodic risk evaluation reports, PRER, which we'll talk about in a second. Being proactive and timely to deal with NMPA communications or requests, showing or demonstrating sufficient post-market qualification, personnel and responsibilities, and dealing with the relevant regulator at a national and a provincial level. In terms of deadlines, they are also set out here on the slide, and I won't go into them in detail. You can read them at your leisure. But in case of specific adverse event triggers, you have certain time periods, of course, which you'll be familiar with from your home jurisdiction, within which to respond to the, or rather notify the regulator, I should say. It also depends on whether it's a local China event or an international event. Please note that international events are also notifiable. I mentioned PRER. There are specific annual reporting requirements for medical devices that are registered with NMPA. It depends whether it's the first year of registration or subsequent, and also which risk class the product is in. Class 1 medical device only needs to prepare the document annually for the first 5 years, and then, will only need to submit the document if requested by NMPA or the local provincial MPA. Class 2 and 3 medical devices, on the other hand, need to submit to NMPA each year the PRER. However, after the product is renewed, they only need to keep it and provide in case of request. So we're shifting gears again a little bit to talk about localization, because this has also been an interesting post-market topic, although it does feed into and work with other pre-market topics as well. This is also looked at from a regulatory perspective, and we just start with a broader broader look, which is the policy changes that have encouraged hospitals, public hospitals, that is. This does not apply to private hospitals, to source from Chinese manufacturers or Chinese made products, I should say, and though that includes products that are made by international companies in China. So they will also be receptive to the same, or can be included within the same policy push. There's an example here of a public hospital tender list with various particular kinds of medical devices on the tender. Certain percentages of those must be considered and indeed purchased from China domestic manufacturers. In our experience, this still tends to be the lower end devices, the less technologically advanced, lower end consumables and the like, more advanced, high technology medical devices still tend to require or be sourced internationally. But it's an important trend to note. There's a few regulatory updates that we set out here on the slides as well. In earlier this year in March, there was a revised edition of the catalogue of medical device products prohibited from OEM production in China, with some products removed from the catalogue, such as implantable insulin pumps, due to a more developed production process, and this is now seen as relatively low risk. Another announcement was issued earlier this year relating to the writing of OEM quality agreements. There are specific obligations and responsibilities. Then in May, with announcement 53 of this year, NMPA updated the supervision of medical device manufacturing in China, and there are more specific internal review production license approval process timelines, as well as the welcome news that you are no longer restricted to one OEM manufacturer in China. So what are the ways you can localize your production? Either by a market authorization holder structure or a WOFE structure. Really what we're trying to say here is you have a license holder structure, which is the MAH, which then subcontracts the manufacturing to an OEM in China, or you seek to do everything yourself, including a factory set up with a WOFE structure. The broad positives and negatives just set out here on the slide. The MAH structure is quicker and cheaper, but has drawbacks relating to potential IP risks and of course working with such a external contract manufacturer. On the other hand, a WOFE is the better way to protect IP and allows you to remain independent from your distributors and other partners. One popular service relating to the localization from a regulatory perspective is what production step do I need to move to China in order for it to become a made in China product for the purposes of complying with some of these tendering rules. Actually, we've even developed a bit of a service that will take a look at this, to see what do companies need to do to move the least production step to China so that they can continue with their current manufacturing processes, but only move the key steps to China. And we just set out some broad timelines and steps here on the slide, looking at the relevant documents and speaking, of course, with the relevant NMPA itself. Okay, I'm conscious of the time and that we have around 10 minutes to go. So there are a couple of other slides that I think it's worthwhile pointing to, and I'm just going to move forward to those now. The first relates to the relevant standards that have been updated this year and that continue to be updated over time. Alison, maybe you could just speak through the difference between a GB and a YY standard, and when are those relevant?
Of course, no problem. Yes, so the relative GB standards here in China are GB and YY. So these standards are basically based on IEC standards from Europe, but there are some particularities. So basically, we can say that from 80 to 90% of the standards are similar, but for Chinese side there are some particularities. So for testing, we use as a compulsory standards GB and YY, and GBT and YYT are recommended standards. Okay, and used as a base for testing and so on. So manufacturers who wants to perform testing on their devices in China, they have to base on GB and YY, and using IEC as a supporting.
And if it's a /T, meaning recommended, does that mean that you can ignore? Can companies ignore this, or does it really mean you still have to follow it anyway?
It's recommended. They use the term recommended, but mostly have to follow them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
In terms of standards updates for this year, I just think it's worthwhile mentioning a few points relating to a report that NMPA issues each year, looking ahead for the standards proposed. And first of all, it's worth mentioning that these have significant impact for the PTR and testing, as Alison's mentioned, and which of course is an integral part of the product registration process, as well as the subsequent certificate, because the PTR is appended to the final certificate. We've got some figures here as well as to what's happened this year, with around 35 new GB standards and 146 new YY standards. So you can see that as an overall percentage of nearly 2,000 standards, there is quite frequent update. What are the key fields where the standards are updated? Medical lab equipment takes the top spot, followed by orthopedic instruments, general and microsurgical instruments, and then the other two categories, top 5, are dental devices and medical radiation equipment. We've also just said here about a recent standards update where the NMPA made an announcement about an implementation and amendment plan for YY and YYT standards. Although they relate more specifically to the pharmacy sector, they will also be relevant for medical devices because of the sometimes device agnostic or in broader applicability of their nature. So there are 59 new YY mandatory industry standards, with 2 relating to artificial intelligent devices and 7 relating to IVDs. 10 were relating to implantable devices. There are 57 amended YY and YYT industry standards. Sorry, that should say GB, with 6 relating to implantables, 33 relating to recommended standards. 2 were relevant for IVDs and 4 for implantables, which are notable. Of course, what actually happened was over 86 standards were amended in the end. So NMPA is ahead of its targets when we talk about number of standards being revised and introduced. What does this feed into as well? It feeds into the QMS of your product, and QMS is the topic where we're going to finish up on today in our presentation about PMS matters, because there has been a substantial change this year, which is that your quality management system now needs to be submitted as part of the application dossier to NMPA. Previously, the verification of a registrant's QMS was sufficiently demonstrated by a QMS certificate. So a QMS verification is now required for all Class 2 and 3 registrations. On the 10th of October, there was a guideline issued relating to verification of the QMS for registration of medical devices. the on-site inspection is performed in parallel with application documents technical review during the technical review stage. Whilst this is not new in itself, these guidelines specify in detail the points the inspectors will check, and there's a checklist of 73 items, 32 are key, 41 are more general, with inspector conclusions for each being either conformed, non-conformed, or non-applicable. Depending on the criticality of each of the items, the inspection will pass or require rectification, which will then finally lead to a pass mark. So this is something that requires review across the whole of the life cycle, and indeed is something that manufacturers are more burdened by in needing to have their QMS submitted as part of the application dossier. Alison, what are you seeing customers ask about the QMS submission as part of the application dossier? What sort of questions are customers asking here?
Okay, thank you, Hamish. So the first questions that come to the mind of our customers and which level they have to prepare the QMS. So the QMS, we always suggest to follow the guidelines. So the guidelines could be a little tricky and difficult to understand, but we need some. But our expertise, we clarify all their questions for them. So, for example, which level shall we define the structure of the company? So what an NMPA wants to know and how an NMPA wants us to describe our company, because some companies, they are aware and they want to protect their R&D documentation. So, and that's the most important questions they say to us: in which level shall they provide this information to an NMPA?
Thank you. That's helpful. And maybe if there's any questions coming up from the audience about QMS, we'll be happy to speak further. Otherwise, that's all we wanted to talk about for today. Thank you for your time, and apologies again for the technical difficulties at the start of the webinar. But thank you for your patience. Just briefly, the services we provide, we've set out here in some more detail, which moves from pre-registration through registration, including local agent support, type testing support, labeling, and post-registration, of course, which has been the key topics today, like GMP, QMS, and SOP adaptation and localization of your certificate in China. Thank you for your time, attendees, and look forward to speaking and connecting separately. Have a nice afternoon or morning. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for listening.